our presentation for today's seminar. We are going to be giving a start now, and I think you're going to find some real interest in what we have to show you today. The focus of this presentation is on improving process cycle time, which can be used to improve supply chain performance. Now, process cycle time improvements can apply everywhere in your organization, and we're going to be showing you how the functionality that you need to look at can be used throughout your organization. Next slide. So before we actually get started, I'll take a minute and give you a quick overview of who is ISS Group. We've been around for a while, since 1986. We were a ERP solutions implementer for many years, and in fact a QAD ERP reseller from 1995 through 2000. But the focus shifted to become a supplier and a specialist in e-commerce and internet-capable applications. We were the key implementer of trading partner transactions, which was a component that was resold by QAD and is still in place at many QAD customers. ISS Group is a current provider of solutions and services to over 300 QAD end-user organizations. In the last several years, part of our focus has been to develop the advanced approval routing technology, which is used to improve process cycle time, improve controllability, and to add value to organizations for functionality that is not provided in the existing ERP applications, regardless of what that is. So if I would say that if we're looking at what ISS does, is we are involved in digitizing business processes. And we're going to spend some time talking about what that actually means. The whole point of this is to find ways to connect people and processes via the cloud and mobile devices, and utilizing our digital technology to bring that all together in a way that improves cycle time, improves performance, improves both employees and supply chain partners as part of the delivery of functionality. Next slide. So here's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to focus on the way our technology or any internet-enabling technology can be used to standardize business processes, reduce cycle time, provide process visibility to all of the stakeholders, improve process control, and then to eliminate the reliance on paper forms to make this a digital experience. And the focus of what we're going to be looking at is to improve cycle time. Now, we're not new at this, as you can see here in front of you. We have been involved in delivering functionality and applications to a broad range of customers in medical devices, in industrial equipment, in electronics equipment, in a whole variety of areas, so that we are not talking about a very focused, limited scope. We're talking about how helping companies internationally deliver value to their partners, to their employees, and to their customers, and have that add to their bottom line. If you have any interest in any of these, please feel free to send an email, and we can connect you to the people involved to see how they have used our capabilities. Next slide. So here is our agenda for today. We're talking about connectivity tools and how they add value to your organization and your supply chain. So we're going to talk about how anytime, anywhere cloud access adds value. We're going to show you the ability to use supplier punch-outs, or as we refer to it, the new EDI. So all of your requisitioners or your inquiry users can get value from your supply chain. How email alerts can be used to add value, and how electronic forms and approval workflows can be used to compress the cycle time of business processes to improve performance, how mobile functionality adds to this, and then finally, how do you use these tools to improve the financial benefits that are inherent to what we deliver. Next slide. Now, I'm sure most of you, may not be as old as I am, have been involved since the beginning of the Internet. But do you even remember what it was like? What it was like before the Internet became the general mode of how we do business? We're going to talk about how you as an organization and an individual uses both the Internet and mobile tools, communication, shopping, networking, mapping, information, games, and everything else that we do, which has now become a standard model for how both we as individuals and corporations do business. Next slide. First off, let's talk about this. We need, and you need, to find ways for your company to utilize the connectivity power of the Internet. The classic models of how you do business have changed, and if you do not find ways to use the cloud to enable your business processes, you are losing out to others that are making use of these capabilities. Today's companies are not 8-to-5 organizations. Your customers are spread around the world. Your corporation is probably spread around the world, and you need to find a way to make your business operations effective around the world every day of the year. Now, here is also a component piece of this. Social networking and modeling has become terribly important because this has moved to be the standard model of ways that companies interconnect. One time it would be if you put an ad in a newspaper, that was all you had to do. But in today's world, tightening the organization and the connections between you and your suppliers and your customers has become the way that you build value for your partnerships and your organization. It used to be that a company may have 2,500 suppliers that they may have done one piece of business to in a year. Today, companies are focused on dropping down to many fewer suppliers and then managing and organizing how they do business with them to add value to both sides of that equation. And we're going to talk about how this anywhere, anytime cloud access helps make that happen. Next slide. So to show you how this actually works, we're going to show you some examples. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have my associate Frank Salisi, who is our VP of Development, come out, and actually we're going to walk through some of what this does. So let's say that you are anywhere in the world and you bring up a web browser. And from there, you want to make a specific connection. So we're going to go and bring up one of our applications. Now, this isn't the only way this can happen. This just happens to be an example. So don't think of this as this is the only way this happens, but we have to have an example. So Frank is going to log into one of the component pieces we do, which is I purchase, which brings him into the ability to look at setting up a connection to a supplier. And you'll notice that we're able to connect to all of our approved suppliers, and you'll notice also that immediately we bring up the ability to make use of the social networking connections that may be related to this supplier. For instance, we could connect right from here to their Facebook corporate account. We can look at their LinkedIn. We can do a YouTube to look at how they might be presenting how to use their product or how to install their product. Or we can go right to doing a lookup to their corporate website, to doing what we're going to show you in a short time of what we call punch out, to be able to link and purchase from a supplier without having to know about how that all works. Now, this is a case of where that every supplier that is now part of your constellation of suppliers, that it is to establish this closer relationship that allows you to work with them. The whole point is, given the thing that we are from a web browser, a buyer or a requisitioner can be anywhere in the world on any device they have and still be able to get through and deal with what they need to do with this supplier without having to know where they exist in the world, who the specific person is, or anything else. This is how we expose this relationship and manage this relationship in a transparent way to everybody within our organization. A point I want to make here is that we have constraints in place so that each user that will come into this will have their own view of what they can do in relation to this supplier. Obviously, we don't want every possible requisitioner going in and maintaining an IM messaging communication to a potential supplier, but you want to make sure that those that need it have access to it. Again, we have accessibility, but we also have controllability. And we're able to do this from a cell phone, from a tablet, from a computer, anywhere, regardless of where this is coming from. If one of our or your corporate users has access through this, they're able to make use and deal with this relationship effectively. We'll go to the next slide. So now let's talk about one of the ways that the people throughout an organization may be able to make use of dealing with a supplier. Now, all of you have used what we call the Amazon model to get access to your suppliers. But the important point to look at here is we need for you as a corporation to provide price consistency and control. You need to know that when people go to talk to suppliers, they get only the products that are under contract and at the contract prices. We need to make sure that then when a PO is created, that the data in that PO is accurate and the prices don't change and the capabilities don't change, so that you maintain control. Now, the other point to make is your suppliers have made a huge investment in making their capabilities available to you as a buyer. So rather than you having to reinvent these investments, you're able to take advantage of them from the investments made by the suppliers. But since all of your users are familiar with going on the web and buying stuff, whether it's from Amazon or eBay or CDW or someplace else, this is a very familiar experience. They don't have to reinvent anything. They don't have to figure out how this is supposed to work. It just works as they expect it to. But more importantly than that, your suppliers, as part of this partnership, send back to you as a buying organization a lot of information that is then able to be used by you as a purchasing organization to understand what you're spending your money on, how you're spending it, where you're spending it, in ways that are far beyond what you are used to. Now, we refer to this as the UNSPSC coding system, and if you're interested in what that means, take a look at our website. We have a couple of presentations that go into this in detail, but what it really says is you're able to provide the consolidation information that allows you to now negotiate contracts on a worldwide basis, knowing what you're buying, who you're buying it from, and what it actually is. Next slide. Now we're going to look at an example of what a punch-out is. Now what we're showing here is punch-outs to some sample partners that we have prepared, but they are ways that we can extend this, not just to those that have already supplied these capabilities, but even talk to suppliers about how they can arrange to do that, even if they're not one of the major providers. But what we're going to do is, as an example here, we're going to be one of your people in some far-flung part of your organization that needs to buy something. And we're going to have them just select a supplier, and you'll notice that each one is defined as to what its intended use is. And you'll notice that we go into their website, and if they were just to pull up this website on their own, it would look exactly the same. The difference is that as part of doing this, we have actually logged into their website as a buyer from our organization. So automatically, they're only going to show this requisitioner those items that are under contract, and they're only going to show the contract pricing that has been pre-agreed upon. So this shows that this user is coming in as the account manager under John Crane to buy something. And so when this user now goes and buys stuff, rather than having it show up in a shopping cart in the same way, what happens is when they build up this shopping cart full of stuff, it doesn't actually buy it. What it does is send back when they check out to an internal shopping cart as part of your organization that is a requisition for purchase. In other words, they went in the normal way they would go to buy stuff to a preferred supplier, and what they get back is a requisition. Now, this means they did not actually spend money, but what they did do was get all of the specification information needed so that now this can be processed through an approval process that allows the approvers to, either at terms of a business unit or a budget unit or as a specialty interest unit. For instance, if these are IT pieces that are needed, we're going to have IT people being involved in the approval process. And then when this is finally approved, it goes to that supplier as an official PO, which will result in that product being shipped to this requisitioner, just as though they did this buy on the website. The only difference is now we have a corporate control of what was spent, where it was spent, why it was spent, and make sure that it fit all of the budgetary requirements of that business unit. That's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? Next slide. So from here, how do we make this stuff work? Okay, we said we sent out, we set up a requisition, but how do you compressed the approval process. The normal model is somebody writes out a requisition and they fill it out and they put it into the black hole of the corporate environment, and maybe it comes out the other end, maybe it doesn't. In this way, we have set up an automated process with complex business rules applied, and we have sent out alerts to the appropriate people, not just everybody, but the appropriate people involved in this process, so that wherever they are, when they get an email, and we're going to show this to you, they can then decide, do I approve? Do I disapprove? Is this okay? Do I need to make changes? And the whole hierarchy of approvals is involved and managed automatically from wherever these people are in the world. Even if they were not available, they would be able to assign a substitute that could take care of it in their absence. So we have eliminated the human lag problem. Inevitably, you know, the requisition comes in on Friday afternoon and no one looks at it, maybe until Monday afternoon. And so we already are 3 days into it. And many times, especially in the MRO process, requirements can be very specific. So the whole point of this is to be able to keep this process workflow flowing so that not only does it continue to flow, but the requisitioner has the visibility to go in and say, hey, you know, it's stuck on somebody's desk, they're not replying, and they have the ability to control how this gets done. Even more importantly, since we're working with an email interface that everybody in the organization is familiar with, they don't have to find some new application to use. They don't have to invent some new piece they have to look at. When they look at their email, it's going to be there, and we're going to show that to you. Next slide. Now we're going to take you in and show you some examples of some of these possible alerts. Here is an example of a requisition that came from Frank Salisi to his supervisor. And you can see in this email is all the information that is needed for this supervisor to be able to define, yeah, I want to approve it, or yeah, I don't. And they have the ability to deal with everything that is on that rec, including they could actually punch out and make sure that this fits within department budgets. They can make sure that it's with an approved supplier, and they don't have to go looking for anything. Everything they need to deal with is right there in front of them. Even the ability to call up CDW in this case and say, gee, is there an alternative that might be cheaper? If a buyer is concerned about that or an approver is concerned about that, everything they need to know is right in front of them. Next element. Here's another example of where a supervisor has said, no, that's too much. I don't like to work with that supplier, or whatever their reason is. They can reject that approval. It will go back to the requisitioner, who can then make changes and reapply it. And all of that information is retained in an audit trail so that everyone knows where things stand and where the process is. So here's an example of that they may decide that they want to go and actually look at the total details of the requisition, or they may have an argument, in this case, the note 002, that incorrect pricing, or there's not enough left in the budget this year, we can't do this. So nobody is left out in the cold. They know, why a refusal was done or a rejection was done. And so the requisitioner can figure out, how do I deal with this? And the approver says, everything that they've done is followed by corporate process. the audit trail is there, and they knew that this was outside of budget, so there was no question about why they made that rejection. Next example. Now here's an example of what is called a force approve. Now, for example, it could be that that supervisor knew that a production machine was down, and if a production is down, it could cost the company hundreds of thousands or even millions a day because the machine isn't working. So he can't wait to get all of the potential approvals that might be required. He needs to get it done now and get it in that supplier's hands. But that doesn't mean that you want to lose traceability or auditability. So in this case, somebody who had the capability or authorization to force the approval, it is done. It now can get sent to a supplier, and we get the parts in that are needed. But in fact, the audit trail is maintained, and a message gets sent to the higher up chains to ask, all right, why was this done? Nothing disappears in the mist, so that you know that there was a reason why it happened. Now, why do this? Well, what happens now is when you get these kind of requirements and somebody needs something now, what they do is they go outside of the chain and they just tell the supplier, you got to do this, you got to send it, I'll figure out how to get the approval later. But that creates problems because it may not come from an approved supplier, it may not be at an approved price. So what we've done is maintain control, but still allowed people to get their jobs done. And when you allow people to do their jobs within the system, rather than having to go outside of the system, everybody wins. Example, next. When a requisitioner requisition goes through the process and is approved, they get a response back telling them that it's happened, that it's been approved, that the PO has been executed and has been sent to the supplier, and they can go on and know that they have an expected delivery date, the expected cost, and they now can go on and focus on getting their work done. And the important point here is that when the purchase order is now sent to that supplier, he has an actual copy of the PO, if you'll notice, included in the message, so that the supplier has a copy of the PO. This is executed by the underlying system. And so that even with an e-signature applied, because it has been approved within the business rules that have been defined. This helps everybody compress the time of requisition to delivery of whatever is needed within the approval requirements of that organization. We have not bypassed anybody. We have not bypassed any of the rules or the budgets. All we've done is to compress it so that people get their job done, yet the corporation is able to maintain control. In the next slide. So what we're going to talk about now, believe me, now what I've talked about previously was purchasing requisitions. But let me explain that that is just one of the essential business processes where an approval flow is required. And I want you to get fixated that, oh yeah, you got iPurchase. Well, that's cool, but that's not what my requirements are. Electronic forms and approvals workflow can be applied to virtually any business process in your organization that requires an approval workflow. This can be a CapEx request. It could be a sales order request. It could be a quote. This could be any number of other elements within the organization. It could be an engineering change order. It could be any number of other things. The whole point is we try to compress this and remove the non-value-added elements to it, that by digitizing the request, we eliminate the paper, we enforce the approval policy while providing visibility to the whole process to everyone involved in the process. At the same time, we collect all of the process data and timestamps and actions so that we can analyze this afterwards to find out where are the roadblocks, what do we have to improve, and how do we get our employees able to do their business better, faster, and easier. And this last point, we've, especially in the purchasing area, we eliminate the requirement of people to go out and do what we refer to as a maverick spend. You know as well as I do, if a production machine is down, the production manager's job is to get that machine running now. And if he has to work outside of the processes, he's going to do it because he gets measured in getting the job done, getting production done. But if you can make his job easier to do it within the process, then he can outside of the process. Everybody wins. Next slide. How, I'm talking about how this stuff works. So what are some examples of how well this stuff works in different areas within the organization? Now, this happens to be from an AIIM market intelligence report. If you want to go to AIIM.org, you can actually get this yourself, and there's a lot of additional stuff. But let's look at this. Within these areas, and not all of them are manufacturing-based, but if you're looking at areas, how successful are people in implementing and make work paperless processes? Because that's really what we're talking about. How to eliminate running around with a piece of paper to get stuff done. And you'll notice that well beyond 60% for almost all of them is the ability to say that the response has been, or the value has been good. We're talking about contracts, procurement, customer correspondence, applications, internal process. This is a biggie. This is a biggie we find huge. Just in something like a CapEx request or even a vacation request, etc. Plant records, inspections, engineering change orders, all kinds of areas that you may not have thought of. You know are a problem in your organization, and you know that stuff gets lost in the cracks. Everybody assumes it does. Why can't we help you digitize this process so that all of the stakeholders know what's going on and allows them to improve the overall response time and the satisfaction and the willingness to believe in the process that you can within and outside of your organization. Next slide. So here we're asking, AIIM, we're asking companies, what was the improvement from the process of changing? And here's where you see the biggest benefits. Better records for audit trail or compliance. And because of the audit trails, for instance, that we retain, everything that's done is retained and ability to be audited, reported on, and analyzed. That's a big one. We're talking, 55%. Customer response. If you've got an approvals workflow on a sales quote so that you're able to get back to the customer within a day rather than 5 days. Monitoring of the status and the workloads of things. And this is huge because people don't have to go running around inside the organization to get things done. Also, a huge benefit here is reduced staff resources. Do you have somebody whose job it is primarily to run around and find out what is the status of stuff and where things are? That's huge. And you can actually utilize those people in more productive ways. Fewer errors. Now, because we have so much error trapping capability within the default screens that we build, people don't put in junk information. And if you don't put in junk information, you don't get junk results. Also, we have this huge improvement in visibility. So if a requisitioner puts in a requisition, they can follow that process to make sure that things don't get lost. So what we have is the ability here to make sure that there is a benefit and a value to digitizing processes for everyone involved in the process. Next slide. Now, nothing is perfect and nothing doesn't come with attendant problems. So there are some potential issues. So what are the biggest problems caused by paper-based processes that we want to get rid of? Well, I'm sure you recognize virtually all of these. Every one of these has been an issue within your organization, and by digitizing these processes, by making them available to users to monitor and manage, virtually every one of these elements is reduced or eliminated. So you don't have to send something by mail. You don't have to send it through the courier. You don't have somebody having to wait until they go into the office the next day to do something. You don't lose the ability to enforce compliance. Paperwork doesn't get lost on someone's desk. All of these things have huge potential to improve profitability, improve control, and reduce process cycle time. And these are examples of real-world results from this. This is not conjecture. I'm not talking about what might happen. I'm talking about what people have found when they do this. Next slide. How do we, as an organization, help make this happen? We have come up with what we call AART, that we have developed a technology that can be applied to virtually any business process, to digitize it, to enable it to be done throughout anywhere within an organization on any device that a user has access to. And we can build very complex rules and that are user definable. We don't have to program this stuff. And these are dynamic routing. I mean, if one rule goes one way, it goes to one group, and under another condition it may do another group, we can set up both simultaneous and sequential approvals, including the ability for somebody that knows they're going to be out of the office for 2 weeks to designate somebody else to be their approver, and yet that approval is traced both to the actual approver and the designated approver, so all of the accountability is maintained. Not only that, you know as well as I do that nothing is simple. So a request comes in, it gets denied for a reason. Well, then it goes back to the requester who needs to make a change and then resubmits it. Well, you don't want to lose that. You want to understand the process. So you can, a requisitioner can retract, revise, and resubmit, but we don't lose any of that history. So we have the complete history of all the approval attempts as well as the final result. Every one of these things with a time and date stamp for auditability. So when corporate wants to find out why something happened, they can know who did it, when they did it, and why they did it. And this is true in every business process in your organization. Next slide. We're going to show you now an example of how an approval is set up. Here is an example of a series of requisitions, and I'm using requisitions again because it's convenient, that shows that there was an approval attempt submitted. It is now pending, waiting for the approval of a supervisor, yet the requisitioner and everybody in that approval flow can see exactly where it is, who's the next on the step, and what was involved. And this is the way that we are able to maintain both visibility and control. You'll notice that if somebody has a question, is this in the right accounting group, or is it the right item, or is it from the right supplier? Every piece of this is visible and changeable. For instance, one of the things that we find is people like to buy XYZ computer, and it may be an approved vendor, but it may be that IT has a special relationship and wants to convert this and change it to another supplier. They could do that, but it doesn't become invisible to the requisitioner. The requisitioner is going to see they change it from Dell to Lenovo, and if they have a question about it, they will get a response that allows them to, raise their hand and say, what's going on here? Or at the same time, the IT people involved in maintaining that contract and know why they have that relationship can respond before it actually shows up on a user's desk. All of this is built into this process. It can't happen unless you have visibility and accountability within this flow. You can see where the next steps go, and this is by levels. Within the defined process, it goes from a level 10, which is that supervisor, down to the next level up. And you'll notice that at the next level up, there are multiple people who may be able to do this approval. Any one of them that was to do the approval would work, but you'll notice that Alex, in this case, is out on vacation. He's designated Bill Cox to be able to do the approval in his stead. Pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. And again, let me state, this capability, this process capability is applicable to any business process in your organization, many of which you haven't even thought of being able to benefit from this kind of a capability. Next step. Frank, if you have something special to say, feel free to, butt in and say so, all right? See, here he's showing the finance group has a number of other people involved. There's a hierarchy to these approvals, both simultaneous, Jim and Alex and Frank, as well as the substitutes, as well as if a financial commitment exists above a certain point, it may have to go to a CFO for approval. Every one of these approval workflows is defined by the parameters assigned to it and can differ based upon the dollar amount, the items involved, the suppliers involved, what budgets are involved, etc. And you can set up just about any rules you want around how these approvals have to work. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So we talked about this being functionality that's applied in a mobile world. Well, let's face it. Today, in your organization, everyone carries a mobile device. Everyone has access to multiple devices. It may be a phone, it may be a tablet, it may be their computer at work, it may be their computer at home, or in a business center in a hotel on the road. And your people are comfortable interacting with multiple devices. They expect them to all give them the same view of what they need to look at. So they want to know if they're looking at it on their phone or in a hotel room that they get the same information and able to provide the same functionality. So they really have the model that the job people have has really extended to be anywhere, anytime. And you know yourself that nobody gives you a buy just because you happen to be on the road. They expect you to still get your work done. An interesting concept here is a pharmaceutical company like Bristol Myers Squibb. Oftentimes, if there's like a snowstorm or a flood or whatever, we'll just tell people to stay home. Well, when people stay home, they're still required to get their work done. They still have an expectation that they have to do their job. And so in today's world, where you sit is not an excuse not to do what you need to do. And in the same way, what we've said is we're adding to that and allowing people to interact with their departments, with their systems, and with their processes, regardless of where they are. Next slide. Now, every time that we do this, we have to be aware that regardless of where people come from and what device they're using, everything they do needs to be tracked. What they do, when they do it, how they do it. Everything is time-stamped. Everything is tracked as to who did it, when they did it, and where they did it. And the important point is to understand that business processes don't care where you are, they care what you did, when you did it, and how you did it. And we need, and part of our expectation here is to make sure that that is always done. Okay, we got Frank. Can you go on to next?
I am back. Sorry, folks. I somehow lost my voice connection.
Well, I'm going to turn you over, and Frank is going to talk a bit about how mobile use can be done from a phone or anywhere else. And Frank, who is our VP of Development and a very creative guy, is going to show you some examples how virtually everything that we're talking about can be done from any internet-enabled device you have access to.
Thanks, Bruce. We're looking at my iPhone here. This is a rendering of my actual phone being displayed on my computer, and you're seeing, for those of you that have iPhones, you're seeing the standard iPhone iOS email app. And I have a requisition here that I generated a little bit earlier that shows that Supervisor 1 is required to approve a requisition. And you'll see the three buttons there in the middle. I can't, unfortunately, point to them, but you'll see click here to view, approve, and reject. Actually, I can use my computer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and approve this requisition right from my mobile device simply by clicking on the approve button. And you'll see it takes me directly into iPurchase, and it does say thank you for approving the requisition. So we have approved the rec in literally no time. All the data that I needed to go ahead and approve that rec was included in the email. If I turn it sideways, you may get a better view of it. But all the data that I need to make my decision is included in this email, as Bruce had mentioned earlier. And I simply need to go ahead and click that approve button to approve the requisition.
Yeah, and at this point, this is then an approval, if this is the last step in the process, that then creates the PO. PO gets sent to the supplier. The approval message gets sent back to the requisitioner, so everybody knows what's going on, and everybody that is part of the process has access to know what's going on, regardless of where they are and what device they're using.
And you'll see that some more emails have coming through because of that approval. The next person in line has now been sent an email requesting their approval. I'm going to see if I could turn that off. Okay.
Now, and an important point to remember is I would love for our audience to stop and consider how that capability can be used for virtually any business process within their organization. And I'm sure that your creative minds can think of ways that are more than just requisitions, but it could be anything, say, from an engineering change order request or a vacation request or a CapEx expense or a service requirement or an approval of a new customer for credit or an approval of a new vendor, that all have to be integrated into the entire organization and needs to be applied with rules. But all of that requires you to actually benefit from that, to understand how that affects what happens. What we have, because we capture all of that information, we also are able to come back and understand where the roadblocks are. Just as an example, here is a case of where Supervisor 1 took 80 hours to respond, whereas the next 3 levels were able to respond very quickly. So we can capture all kinds of information about this process flow that allows later review of the data to try to figure out where the blocks are, where the roadblocks are, who is the problem, or what is the problem. It could be, as you'll notice, that this Supervisor 1 has rejected 13 requisitions. Maybe there's a good reason, maybe there's not. Why does it take 80 hours for them to go through the approval process? So the question is not that this is good or bad, but to give the information that you need to understand how this information is applied. So we can understand how many requisitions there were, who was applied to them, what was outside of budget, what was inside of budget, what suppliers were involved, all of the kinds of things that you might want to know in terms of managing contracts, managing pricing, and managing requisitioners to find out where problems are, to eliminate them, to compress cycle time. So this is not just an XYZ issue here. It's going to take some intelligence to review this data to understand what it means to your organization. But we do supply the data, and we can display it to the appropriate users so that they can make the appropriate actions. Next slide. So let's talk about, we only have a few minutes left. I don't want to use up all our time. Let's talk about some conclusions. The internet and technology that leverages connectivity will assist your organization if you decide to make use of it. The capability is there. You don't have to invent anything new. It's capable of doing it now. And what is the result? We can dramatically reduce process cycle time. And what does that mean? That means new dollars in your pocket in terms of profits and reduced costs. We can improve the productivity. If a user doesn't have to spend all day, 1 day a week, running around trying to get signatures on a document, that means they can spend their time doing actual work. So, but still, the bottom line is we can improve cost savings because we can now negotiate better contracts. We can control what the spend is. We can make sure that the spend is only on approved products and approved vendors. And because we're able to compress that, we're able to improve profitability. On the same side, if we can take a request for a sales quote and cut that down from 5 days to 1 day because we got the appropriate approvals, it's a lot more likely we're going to get that sale than it is somebody that comes in a week later. So all of these things conspire to improve our ability as a corporation to reduce costs and improve profitability without negatively affecting the people in our organization. And in fact, we allow them to do their job cheaper, better, and faster. Next slide. Here is just one quick example, and this is indicative. This is not my data. It's not ISS data. This is out of the Aberdeen Group. It's a very well-respected organization. In their tests, in a requisition to PO effort, is they're able to change the cost of a requisition to order from $51 to $26 and cut the cycle time by 2/3. And we're talking 9.6 to 3.4 days. That's the average. And at the same time, to pull in the spend under management from 42% and raise it up to 60%, which drops down the Maverick spend down to 20%. And their statement here at the bottom is really clear. If you're talking about for every $1 in sales, companies spending 50 to 55% on purchase materials, if we can cut that down by half, you're talking reductions in purchasing costs translate into dollar for dollar profit, top line improvement. And that's a number that we should all be, aware of. Next slide. Quick summary here. How do you do this? Take advantage of the tools supplied and provided by your suppliers to improve connections, reduce response time, and control spend. Work with your suppliers as partners. Reduce to only those suppliers that are willing to work with you. Implement process tools to streamline your communication across your organization. So if you enforce policies but still let people get their jobs done, you will get an acceptance of that enforcement because it makes their jobs easier. Eliminating paper forms, as you saw in our earlier slide, is a huge benefit. Paper is a pirate of time. And by eliminating paper forms, you allow better traceability, better auditability, better control, and improved profitability. Now, your employees have smart mobile devices. Accept that. Use them. Make them work as part of the critical processes to connect the people across your organization and your partners. And if you do that, you will add value rather than trying to restrict their use. Next slide. Now, I just open it up, and I'm sorry we did use up a lot of your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Can you open it up and make sure everybody can ask questions? Now, if we don't have questions, I would hope that if you did have anything you wanted to ask, feel free to contact anybody in this group that you see on the screen. Send an email or give a call. We'll be glad to respond in private. But if you have a question about how it might apply to how you want to do your business, feel free to do so. We'll be glad to talk to you and work with you. And if we don't have anything else, we've now reached the 1 hour point, and we will let you get on. But have a good day and a good future. Thank you very much for attending.